Right, we got New York in the building. We got Chapel Hill, North Carolina in the building. Baltimore, Maryland. As you're shouting out where you're coming in from, feel free to text a friend, let folks know that we are on. We're going to get some really great information here tonight. We got a lot of great experts who are going to be sharing out information. So feel free to tell a friend to tell a friend. We're going to get started in the next 4 minutes. Again, thank you so much. All the way from Dallas, Fort Worth, from Atlanta, Georgia, from Pittsburgh. We in here. We got Luke all the way from Alabama. What's going on, Dr. Reed? It's good to see you. I heard Brooklyn's in the house tonight. Shout out to Brooklyn. Thanks for joining. A lot of New York out here. Give it a couple more minutes. Again, if you know somebody who has student debt, you know someone who's struggling with their student debt, you know an advocate who is eager to engage in this fight to cancel student debt, feel free to invite them, join the call. It's not too late. We're going to get started in 2 minutes. We got a plethora of amazing speakers. Again, my name is Wisdom Cole. Excited for you to join us tonight for the Cost of Freedom. And we'll get started in about 2 minutes. All righty, everybody. Again, my name is Wisdom Cole. I proudly serve as the Senior National Advocacy Director for the NAACP. But tonight, I'm also in another capacity as a fellow with the Roosevelt Institute, part of the Roosevelt Society, specifically working to reimagine America. Very excited to pull this panel tonight that is continuing to address the issue of student debt, of equity and the future of college, right? It is important for us to be able to convene together to talk about the issues that are most important in this moment in time when it comes to higher education and it comes to so many key critical issues that impact the future of education. Part of the work that I've been doing for the last 5 years has been really working to sound the beat when it comes to cancellation of student debt, recognizing that student debt cancellation is a racial justice issue. And when we have economic justice, we have racial justice. The work that I've done with so many people who are on the call tonight, advocates, organizers, legal scholars, researchers, and member leaders who have worked together to ensure that student debt cancellation is a pressing issue for the last few administrations. Currently, in this moment in time, as we've seen so many gains happen over the last 4 years, in the matter of 6 months, we've seen an aggressive rollback, right? This is something that I'm calling economic violence. It's important for us to understand how we got here, the different contributing factors, and what can we do? right? There is a lot of confusion out there. There's a lot of things that are being thrown at us, that are being bombarded at us. And so this space is really to ground us in what is true, what is real, and what we can do. And so I'm super excited to introduce our next speaker. But before we get started, just a quick couple ground rules. If you have any questions, feel free to throw that in the Q&A chat. If you are feeling something, I know we're in this virtual reality, but I need y'all to talk back to me, right? Make some noise in the chat, throw some W's. If you're ready to see our debt be canceled, if you're ready to organize for free college, make some noise in the chat, drop some W's, ensure that we are engaging with the speakers who are here tonight. And so I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker, who's really going to ground us in why we're here in this space. Very excited to introduce Katie Kirchner, the Vice President of Field Building Programs at Roosevelt Institute. Katie has been a longtime friend, but also a thought partner in the youth movement together. I started a little bit after her, but she has given me so much game and, do I say it, wisdom when it comes to navigating spaces like this. And so to see her grow, to see the work that she's doing, as well as the space that she's creating for Roosevelters is a true honor. And so it's great to be a part of the Roosevelt family officially as a Reimagined Fellow. And I'll pass it over to Katie.
Hi, everybody. Wisdom and I were joking earlier this summer that you get to a point in the youth like the progressive ecosystem and sort of being part of the youth movement for so long that you just get to work with all your friends. And so it's been really fun getting to have Wisdom officially join the Roosevelt family. I am really excited to welcome you all here today. I wanted to just quickly say a couple of lines about what Roosevelt is and what we do, and then sort of tee up why I'm so excited that we're hosting this conversation. Um, so the Roosevelt Institute works to advance policy ideas that sort of rebalance power in the economy so people can have security and dignity and agency in their lives. We try to see around the corner and help make possible bold ideas. And we invest in the people who champion those ideas and make them real, people on the inside and the outside of government. Part of my job is developing the next generation of policy leaders through work we do with undergraduate student fellows and then the program alumni who we call Roosevelters. Um, and so that's Roosevelt. If you're interested in learning more about any of our work, we'll drop our website link in the chat. Um, but the reason I'm excited that we are one of the conveners or the convener of tonight's conversation, is that too often we find the organizing ecosystem and the policy ecosystem out of sync with one another. And I feel very strongly that the future of student debt cancellation and the possibility of some kind of broader reimagining of higher education depends on us bridging that gap to win. And I'm really excited that this conversation is bringing together this set of speakers who represent a bunch of different parts of the coalition and organizing groups who have been championing this work for many years. So welcome, and yeah, Wisdom, I'm going to give it back to you.
Appreciate that so much, Katie. Thank you so much for creating the space, for continuing to allow young people to thrive in the space, to learn about public policy, to learn that they can also rewrite the rules. I had the pleasure to actually attend my first Hyde Park at the beginning of August, and to see the space that's created there for young leaders to continue this work well after we're done is truly an honor. And so thank you so much for doing that. We're going to move on to the first part of our webinar. I'm very excited to introduce this next person. This person I've worked with for quite some time in multiple organizations, but truly has a great grasp and understanding and knowledge about where we're at when it comes to student loans. She's been on the trail for quite some time, ensuring that borrowers are educated, borrowers understand the system and are able to navigate it in a way that is efficient and real to them. Excited to introduce the person who's going to be explaining where we're at and what is going on with student loans in America today. Very happy to introduce Ashley Harrington.
All right. I couldn't tell if I had popped up or not. So
You're good to go. Good to go.
all right. Thank you so much, Wisdom, Roosevelt Institute, Katie, for putting this together. I too am excited to be here with all of my friends and partners. We've been working together for so long, really trying to affect change, and we've had some really positive wins and successes that we're going to talk about. And then we're starting to see rollbacks already, and we know that that's how it goes, ebbs and flows, and that's why it's so important for us to keep convening, keep fighting, and keep bringing more people into the fold to continue to have these conversations and join and push together. So I have a short PowerPoint. It's real short. It has just words on it. So don't judge me for my PowerPoint. But we're going to jump right in. I get to have the fun part where I get to talk about why we're here, how we got here. A lot of this, some of you already know. Anything I miss, I'm so glad that everybody who comes after me is going to just build on and say even more and do even better. So let's jump right in. I can't see the PowerPoint yet.
Should be on screen. Can you see it?
Okay, yes. All right. And I lost it. So we're gonna start with just where we are and how we got here. I mean, I think the most basic thing, as we all know, is we're here because we're in a crisis. $1.7 trillion, 43 million borrowers, that is a big deal. That is a big problem that so many people are dealing with every single day. And we know that over 90% of that debt is federal student loan debt. So this is a federal policy problem. It's a federal policy creation. And so everything we do and a lot of the work that we do can really focus on changes that we can make at the federal level so that we can actually address this crisis and help folks. So I get a lot of questions like, how did we get here? How did this explode so much? And we can go further back than the Great Recession. I think we know that just in terms of who had access to higher education and how as soon as it was opened up to people of color, to women, to everyone, to low-income folks, we saw that the investment by federal and state governments, it really shifted and we started seeing more folks have to rely on federal grant aid. And then after that, beginning to rely on more on federal loan aid. Fast forward to the Great Recession, where we saw communities lose so much wealth, families lose so much wealth, and we saw state budgets actually feel that crunch as well. And anytime we see that crunch in state budgets, a lot of times what you will see is they will take that money from higher education. I'm actually really worried about that right now as we think about the impacts of the big, beautiful bill and what that's going to mean for state budgets and what that is also going to mean for higher education, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later on. But so after the Great Recession, post-Great Recession, we saw more struggling families, more struggling students. We see more people going to college than ever, and we see them having to rely more and more on debt to go to school. We saw that tuition has outpaced wages over the past few decades. It's outpaced grant aid. When the Pell Grant was first created, we know back in the 70s, it covered like 70% of in-state tuition. Now it covers less than 30%. So none of that has kept up. We've seen the rapid rise of for-profit colleges, and they've also exploited federal aid access. We see going back on the accountability, we have accountability, then we have rollbacks. We see the weakened oversight, and we see what that means for borrowers and for this crisis. And so at the bottom line is what we've seen, how we get to $1.7 trillion and 43 million people. More students are going to college than ever before, which I think most of us would say is a good thing, but they're having to borrow more money to go to school, and they're taking longer and struggling more to repay that money back. And so many folks are watching their balances grow and grow. Let's go to the next slide. And we know who's most impacted by this debt. We know about racial wealth inequality in this country. We know about systemic inequity and how that has meant that borrowers of color, Black borrowers in particular, Black women, have been the populations who have most struggled and continue to struggle with student debt. We know about income inequality, and we know about other economically vulnerable populations, veterans, single mothers, other low-income folks who are disproportionately harmed by a system that is primarily based on having to take out debt to pursue dreams. And so what we have seen is that what it also means is that you have 43 million people. I'd say that's like 1 in 7 people in the country. That's a lot of folks who have begun to talk about their student loans, talk about the problem of student loans. And over this past decade, the grassroots organizing was really forcing federal action. It forced folks to find solutions and start to deal with this. And unfortunately, every time we get a win, we know that the other side tries to push back, and they give us political opposition, they give us legal opposition, and we see that those relief efforts starting to roll back. But I get so inspired when I think about what grassroots organizing, what coalition building was able to do on student loans, and what we can do next. Let's go to the next slide. So I think we want to talk a little bit about what happened last administration, because a lot happened. We have this massive student loan system that is complicated, and we saw a lot of things happen in the Biden administration, some of which made it more complicated, some of which didn't do everything it was supposed to do, but we saw a lot happen. So first, we saw a real focus on targeted discharges. We saw discharges announced and some processed for a lot of the for-profit institutions that had preyed on millions of students. We saw fixes to the PSLF program. We saw PSLF work for the first time. I like to say that I am one of those people who got to be a beneficiary of PSLF. And so we saw those fixes. We saw the IDR account adjustment. We saw people actually getting IDR forgiveness. Before then, like 7 people or like 20 people had gotten 7,000 people got PSLF, like 20 people got an IDR, and we saw that change. So we saw real efforts to try to make a system work that hadn't been working for so long. We saw rulemakings after rulemakings, which we're starting to see now again. So we can talk about that later. We saw a new repayment plan that was supposed to be the most affordable repayment plan ever, that had this 10 years, that paid for interest, that had more income protection. And of course, that has been blocked by litigation. If you are one of the 8 million people on SAVE, you know right now that has been very confusing and hard to deal with. We saw the attempt at broad-based cancellation for folks who made a certain income, 10 or 20K, depending on whether you got a Pell Grant. We saw that abusively sued for and blocked by the Supreme Court. And so even though all of this, the wins, the losses, the pieces that were in between, all of this was shaped by this organizing, by the coalition building, and then also by unfortunately litigation, and also folks who were just really, really willing to step up and say, we need more, and continuing to push that. And so we didn't get, I think all of us know we didn't get everything we wanted. And right now we are seeing what that means and how that's being pushed back. But there was a lot that went on during the Biden administration, and a lot that still needs to be done and continue to be improved upon, even from where we started. Let's go to the next slide. So what still exists? I think it's really confusing right now. People ask us all for advice all the time. What do I do with my student loans? What do I do about this? What can I do? And so I want to say what still exists, and I put in theory here because some of it exists, we think, but it's hard to access for various reasons, or it's on hold, and it may start working again. We just don't know. And some of it is just is the lack of transparency from this department. So there are still repayment options. You can still enroll in some IBR plans. There's still IBR, ICR, income contingent repayment, and there's still the pay-as-you-earn plan. There's still deferment and forbearance options. Now, I'm talking about what exists right now in theory, not what's going to exist once this new bill is fully implemented. There is still loan forgiveness for PSLF. There is PSLF buyback. There is a backlog, and it's chugging along slowly if you're trying to get that buyback for time that didn't count before, but there is still PSLF forgiveness. There is still borrower defense forgiveness. There is still closed school discharge and TPD discharge. There are still borrower protections like the right to accurate servicing, and you can still make complaints to the FSA Ombudsman and CFPB. Now, it's not always clear that someone is going to actually look at them and respond to them. We know that. You can also make complaints to your state AGs, and we can talk, and I think folks will talk more about that later. But in theory, all of these things are supposed to be happening or still exist, and folks can access them and use them as a way to help them manage their debt. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit more about the current state of play, which still builds a little bit on what we talked about and what still exists. So we're going to talk a lot about this in the next part of the webinar. This legal landscape is still unsettled. There are injunctions, there are appeals, there are so many things going on, so many different cases. Does SAVE exist or does not exist? I don't think it exists, but technically maybe it does, since there are borrowers who are technically still on the SAVE plan. Recently, since that SAVE has been enjoined for so long, the department announced that they have started charging interest again for SAVE borrowers who are still in forbearance, but those borrowers are also still not getting credit towards PSLF or IBR. We're facing this looming default cliff where there was already 5 million people in default at the start of the year, and another 4 million plus are on track to default later this year. This is really bad because when you default on a federal student loan, you can be subject not just to negative credit reporting, but to wage garnishment, tax refund offset, Social Security offset, which is still paused for right now, but could be turned on again at some later date. And so that impacts not just the individual. So much of student loans impacts your entire family, impacts communities, impacts the entire society. I mentioned that IBR still exists, but the only IBR forgiveness that is technically available is for the income-based repayment plan, and that forgiveness has also been put on hold. We've learned through court filings, and so you can get on IBR, you can get on pay as you earn, you can get on some of these plans, but it's unclear, and get a more affordable repayment plan, but it's unclear if and when you'll be able to get forgiveness. And then also in the practical sense, there is a massive IDR application backlog. It's really hard for folks to reach their servicers right now. And so in terms of actually enrolling and taking advantage of some of these programs, it's kind of like a figure it out if you can, do what you can. And so I don't want to be like too negative, but there are options available, and we still encourage people to apply for all of these, put these in. You have to do as much as you can, help yourself, because no one is going to do it for you or help you. We know that already, especially in this administration. And then now we have this big, beautiful bill that is going to put just two repayment options available for future borrowers and start limiting it for current borrowers. We're seeing changes to the amount of debt folks can take, the plans that are available to them. We're seeing different ways that relief is being limited, and folks will talk a little bit more about what that looks like later. So on top of everything else, the funny thing about student loan program, why I think it's so confusing, is because every time someone tries to tinker with it, right, they just put it on top of everything else. And so it makes a system that's even more confusing, even harder for folks to navigate, even harder for folks to get good servicing on, because we've made a system that's so complicated when we could have started from the beginning, or we could have done things differently prior to last administration. Every time we had this opportunity that we didn't just have to rest on what was already there, we could do something better and really try to make a system that works for other folks, that works for more folks. Let's go to the next slide, or is that my last slide? That is my last slide. So I think I want to stop there. I think I'm really excited to hear the rest of this conversation. We're going to hear some really great advocates who are really going to dig in on some of the legal pieces, the free college pieces, all these pieces, and what folks can do now and how we can continue to advocate for a better system. So thank you so much. I look forward to the rest of the conversation. Thanks, Wisdom.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Can we get some W's in the chat for Ashley, putting us on some good game, get some good knowledge, understanding exactly where we're at in this moment, right? You know, the goal has been always to see the most amount of relief for the most amount of borrowers. It's important for us to understand the state of play, right? As I said earlier, we were able to accomplish a lot, right? We were at a turning point. We were able to make a lot of things happen, a lot of changes happen. And now we're seeing this aggressive rollback. And so, as Ashley likes to say, when you know better, you do better. She's out there informing the public, making sure people understand exactly what is at stake, really making sure that we are re-engaging a generation of organizers, activists, researchers, and policy wonks in this fight to cancel student debt. So thank you so much, Ashley, for all that great information. These slides will be available for folks after the webinar. So next, I would love to introduce our moderator for this conversation. Again, we are talking about the cost of freedom, student debt equity, and the future of college. And this is another IE native, or the Inland Empire, straight out of California. Super excited to call this person a sister in the movement, somebody who has been a co-conspirator at all levels of organizing, activism, as well as policy watching and making sure folks are informed. Super excited to introduce Aisa Banez, the policy director for Student Borrower Protection Center. Aisa, take it away.
Thank you so much, Wisdom. Love the IE shout out. And if I have other fellow So Cal folks or IE folks repping in the audience, sending all of my love. But good evening, everyone. As Wisdom said, my name is Aisa Canchola Banez. I'm the Policy Director at the Student Borrower Protection Center. We're a national nonprofit advocacy, policy, and litigation organization, and we fight to advance policies that alleviate the burden of student debt and protect and strengthen borrower rights, and treat higher education as the public good that it is. So it is such an honor to moderate this evening's panel discussion. I want to send all my love to Wisdom and gratitude for the opportunity to really be able to get the chance to nerd out and just chat with some of the smartest policy wonks and thought leaders in this movement to cancel student debt and finally secure free college in this country. So earlier, as y'all know, we got to hear from Ashley Harrington, a dear friend and phenomenal advocate in her own right, who's been fighting for borrowers her entire career. So just want to thank you, Ash, for helping to ground this conversation and really bring us up to speed on all of the stuff that has taken place thus far over the last few years. But most importantly, remind us of the crisis that remains and that the crisis that also requires ongoing action, regardless of who is in the White House today. So did want to send my love and appreciation to Ashley because it is important. And as Wisdom said, that in any movement, we take a moment to step back and take stock of the wins as well as the crushing losses so that we can mobilize for the fight that remains and the fight ahead. So as a very quick recap of Ashley's remarks, as I mentioned, she gave an overview of the crisis. So 43 million Americans drowning in $1.7 trillion in federal student loan debt. She spoke to how historic state and federal disinvestment in higher education really fanned the flames of this crisis. And as a result, Black and brown borrowers have borne the brunt and now are forced to carry the most weight of this crisis. So long, folks saw student debt as an individual failure. Why did you take on all this debt? I paid off my debt. You should do the same. That could not be further from the truth, right? We know that the student debt crisis in this country is a federal policy problem. It's a federal policy creation. And most importantly, it's a federal policy choice that for too long policymakers had ignored. But it was borrowers who stepped out of the shadows, who refused to carry shame from this debt, and who shared their stories. Advocates working at all levels, local, state, national, organizing and mobilizing to demand action from policymakers. And that is ultimately what made student debt a top economic issue in this last administration. And for the first time, we saw, as Ashley said, we saw our government leaders really attempting to address student debt as a systemic crisis and requiring systemic action. And while we didn't get everything we wanted, as we've got to take stock of the wins that we did get. And so 5 million people at the end of the day were freed from their student loan debt over the last 4 years. And despite what congressional Republicans may want, debt relief options are still existing. There are still repayment options that folks can access. But as Ashley reminds us towards the end of her presentation, that the climate is grim. There's a lot of confusion out there. And what Congress just passed, the one big beautiful bill, it's only going to make things worse. It's only going to make college more expensive, and it's only going to make folks struggle even more to repay their student loans. And so to that point, that we cannot let our organizing and our demands of our government leaders to protect millions of our fellow Americans that are drowning in this debt. So now that we understand how we got here, let's dig into the legal context, the democratic stakes that are at play here, and the pathways forward. And so with that, I'm so excited to introduce our first panelist, Mr. Chavis Jones, who serves as counsel in the Educational Opportunities Project at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. Welcome, Chavis. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much. So Chavis, earlier, Ashley helped remind us of how we arrived at this moment. And so what we really wanted to do first is to peel back the layers of the law itself and the authority that defines what is possible. So Chavis, can you walk us through the legal framework that governs student debt? What federal laws and regulations shape borrower protections and repayment options and the cancellation authority that still remains in the law, regardless of what Congress tried to do, but they were not successful in achieving?
Yes, so Title IV of the Higher Education Act of 1965 governs federal financial aid mechanisms. It includes student debt, and the act authorizes the Secretary of Education to cancel or reduce loans in certain limited circumstances. And so we've heard about PSLF. Ashley talked about that. There are also some other circumstances pertaining to individuals with disabilities who might be permanently disabled, or individuals who have passed away, but also individuals who have gone to institutions that have engaged in nefarious activity, have closed for one reason or another. Um, that's the overarching scheme. But in addition to that, in 2022, President Biden sought to use what was called the HEROES Act, which is a provision that emerged in 2003 or so, that was used during 9/11. And as an interesting fact, Betsy DeVos, who served as the Secretary of Education during the Trump administration, suspended both payments, repayments, and the accrual of interest on federal student loans at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. She relied on the HEROES Act, a law passed once again in the wake of September 11th, and it was used to ensure that borrowers weren't left in a worse place than they started following a national emergency. So insert the Biden administration in 2022, they sought to rely on the same HEROES Act to provide student loan debt cancellation up to about $20,000 in increments of either $10,000 or $20,000, depending on your financial history. If you were Pell Grant eligible during your college years, you could get up to $20,000. And so it was really innovative. It was going to relieve about $400 billion, excuse me, plus of student debt. So a truly, truly innovative solution to the problem of student debt, one that the Biden campaign ran on throughout. And it was ultimately challenged in several lawsuits that made their way to the Supreme Court. And so after federal courts in Missouri and Texas put the program on hold, the Biden administration came to the Supreme Court asking the justices to weigh in. The challengers came from 6 states, from Republican attorneys general, and they urged the justices to strike down the debt relief program, arguing that it does not comply with the HEROES Act and other federal laws. And so they thought that it was too far reaching. So in 2023, Ashley alluded to this, the Biden administration also moved forward what was then called the SAVE plan, which was the most exhaustive and probably the best income repayment-based plan that has ever existed, that was really truly going to reduce the debt burden of folks on individual payments and lead to a much reduced timeline in terms of repayment for individuals. And it was going to help a lot of people. As Wisdom said earlier, student debt is truly a civil rights issue because these plans, the initial $20,000 plan that was shot down and the SAVE plan, would truly, truly change the financial prospects of countless Americans, but particularly Black and brown folks and women who would benefit greatly from those plans. That's a long answer, but that's kind of the overarching scheme.
No, thank you, Chavis. That is so helpful. You know, and one of the points that I think is really important to is, you know, as Congress was trying to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, they attempted to include language that would infringe upon the secretary's authority. You had mentioned the authority in the HEA that the secretary has to cancel debt. Congressional Republicans wanted to include language that would limit the secretary's authority to do that. That language ultimately fell out of the final bill as the bill was being considered in the Senate and was going through what's known as the bird bath, and the parliamentarian came in and said that that was too policy focused. It wasn't budgetary in nature, and it ultimately came out of the bill, which is a huge victory for, you know, for borrowers, and that authority still remains intact, and still is such a key part to whatever happens in the future as we continue to build towards a future cancellation opportunities moving forward. So Chavis, as we saw, and you had mentioned the 2022 case, or 23 case, sorry. You know, we saw the Supreme Court during the Biden administration and have seen consistently across so many other issue areas. You know, the courts have really reshaped this fight. So I'd love to hear from you how this, you know, the state of courts today how is this going to impact advocates and borrowers today?
Well, advocates have to keep fighting. That's one side of it, but it is a different picture from where we were 2 to 3 years ago when we thought that the prospect of student loan cancellation was actually here, and that people were celebrating. I signed up for Save, and I know a lot of people, other people did, but I also would have benefited from the $20,000 loan repayment, loan forgiveness rather. And
Mhm.
so this immediately changes the financial prospects of a lot of Americans. I think that looking at this particular the SAVE plan, and it's been held up in court for months, and so a lot of borrowers who signed up, nearly 8 million borrowers signed up for the SAVE plan, due to an injunction by courts. They've been kind of in forbearance for a long period of time. I actually alluded to this earlier, that as of August, interest starts to accrue on those loans once again, and as a byproduct of the one big beautiful bill or ugly bill, however you want to define it. Uh, the unfortunate part is that it's probably going to be sunset, and as of July of 2028, folks will have had to have kind of transitioned to another plan. And so, given the present constitution of the courts, and trying to stay apolitical as I can, it's very unlikely that the provisions that support the SAVE plan will be upheld legally. And so we have to keep fighting with other mechanisms, trying to ensure that we really push our elected officials to use whatever mechanisms that are available to them under the Higher Education Act, to continue to fight for the everyday borrower, the 5 million people that you alluded to earlier who receive student loan debt cancellation. Their lives are changed forever. And
Right.
I think that the burden of education and the debt that's associated with it um, should not be one that people bear for a lifetime. And we have to create and engender mechanisms that leave pathways for people not only to be illuminated by the beautiful aspects of being educated in America, but by also not having debt that's so crippling that you can't buy a home or that you can't send your own children to school. And so we got to really, really create a groundswell of support where people understand that this doesn't just affect people on one side of the aisle. This affects everybody, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent. This issue of student loans is one that our generations will be wrestling with for some time, but we have to continue to keep our foot on the gas.
Absolutely. Chavis, you said something that kind of perked my ears in using every tool at our disposal, right? So you were talking about how today's courts and the limits of various injunctions have, it's not just about cancellation. Like these injunctions are preventing people from actually repaying their student loans. Folks
Right.
who are in this SAVE forbearance are literally prevented from affordably repaying their loans right now. But you said kind of every tool. So what I would, my next question is, what should students and fellow advocates like ourselves understand about the limits of executive authority versus what Congress can get done through legislation?
Absolutely. I think that, as you alluded to earlier, there are limits to executive power. Now, there's been a lot of executive overreach, and some of that's been challenged in the courts. But the Higher Education Act of 1965 is one that has been used repeatedly to kind of tinker with student loan debt repayment and most recently with cancellation itself. And I think it's that there are levers that are still available there if we utilize them. And I think the students should really look into the history of student loans, look into the history of debt repayment and cancellation, and really think about what's available. Talk to folks who are experts on your campuses about what might be available, and then push your legislators, push your elected officials to really think of something new, not to not succumb to thinking that the executive is the only branch of government, but being reminded that there are three co-equal branches of government. And we talked about one, the courts, and it not necessarily being on our sides. And we talked about the executive in this moment, but there is this legislative path that still avails itself. And I think the students should really push in any way they can to see what's still available via the Higher Education Act, and what other resources the our elected officials might have in this moment to kind of bring about some change as it relates to student debt.
Thank you, Chavis. So this is gonna be my last question. For folks who, also work with state level issues, where do state level initiatives interact with federal law, and what tensions or opportunities are created for folks that work in that space?
Well, there are some people do have some debt that is sometimes held by state actors and the like. And so, and also there are opportunities from state legislators to create more grants and more opportunities for individuals to have less debt on the front end. And I think of Illinois and some other states that have really tried to create, for instance, MAP dollars in Illinois to ensure that students have less debt. I think that we should be pushing for that in this moment. If we're aware that there are going to be fewer avenues to reduce debt burdens on the back end of college and university, we need to create less debt on the front end. And so to the extent that that's possible by providing for more grants and more scholarship monies from the state level, we should be doing that. And so I think that is a great opportunity at each individual state level to push those at the state legislatures to really consider the options that avail themselves. And I think also state legislators have some power with regard to talking to universities about kind of the exponential and growing costs of college and university, as some institutions growing 10% or more per year, and talk about what that means in the present moment when you know that students are going to have fewer vehicles to repay it on the back end. So I think there are a few mechanisms that can be used in this moment to really think critically about student debt.
Thank you so much, Chavis. You brought up so many great points. Legal limits also shape how we think about democracy itself, which brings us really to the next part of our conversation. So with that, thank you so much, Chavis. It was great to hear from you. With that, I'm happy to introduce Chanel Haygood, who serves as the Director of Strategy and Culture at the Equity Research Cooperative. Good evening, Chanel. How are you?
Doing good. How are you?
I am good. I'm excited to be with you tonight. So, thus far, we've discussed some of the legal constraints, but we also know that the debt crisis itself is also reshaping how people actually experience democracy itself. It's really a reminder to so many working people across this country of who our institutions work for and who they don't work for, right? And so, Chanel, in your work, I'm just so excited to ask you some of these questions. What does the student debt crisis reveal kind of in your research? What does it reveal about who our democracy is currently working for and who it consistently leaves behind?
Yeah, definitely. So, as we've talked about today, there are so many current attacks on income-driven repayment plans, loan forgiveness programs, but even before the current attacks to weaponize debt through PSLF and threats to eliminate the SAFE plan, there has been a student loan debt crisis for a while. And that crisis has created a threat to Black and Brown folks' economic security and economic mobility. So it's like, like it's been mentioned here, it's a civil rights issue, it's a crisis. And for us at EQRC, it's war. And we're ready to go to war. And the way that we do that, at EQRC is, through evidence-based research, which I'm happy to talk more about. But we see this through research that, Black borrowers owe on average $25,000 more in student loan debt than their white counterparts 4 years after graduation, that Latinx borrowers are more likely to struggle with repayment due to, lower household wealth and income. And we know that student loan debt may exacerbate racial income gaps and limit home ownership for folks of color. So these studies, that we've done and many more give us the evidence to know that a college education and obtaining a college degree does not create income parity. And by leaving these communities to deal with the burden of student debt, it's creating consequences for their economic security and for their future families. And so, the burden of student debt shows up in ways for Black and Brown people that it impacts their ability to save money, contribute to their 401k, to buy a home. And we know that this type of asset building can lead to wealth and economic security. So for a lot of these borrowers, they're told, the way to a better future is through education, particularly through higher education and degree attainment. So you have communities of Black and Brown borrowers who are taking on this debt that's being sold as good debt because they're using that to finance an education. And in most cases, they're entering into multi-year high interest repayment plans like we talked about that keep them in repayment for several years and continue to, limit their economic mobility and security. So to put it plainly, evidence suggests that Black and brown folks disproportionately take on student loan debt compared to their white counterparts. And these communities have a serious threat to their economic security because of it. And the current threats to PSLF, to SAVE elimination will only exacerbate that for these communities. So our democracy is working for, the wealthy majority, as it always has, and continues to leave behind Black and brown folks, despite their attempts to secure a better future for themselves and their families through the pursuit of education.
Thank you, Chanel. That is so spot on. And just like a constant reminder that you can't talk about student debt in a silo. This is not just a higher education issue. It is an economic issue. It is a racial this issue. It's a gender justice issue. If you care about the thrive, whether or not local communities can thrive, whether or not you have a thriving housing market, et cetera, all of, there are so many different intersections here with it that intersect and touch the student debt crisis. And so thank you for bringing kind of that very dark reality to bring
Yeah, there's only one way to say it. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And we need to know what we're up against here. There was one thing that you had said about how folks have been sold the concept of good debt. And
Right.
for a very long time, policymakers in Washington, remember before I was with Student Borrower Protection Center, I spent a long time on Capitol Hill. And I remember hearing from staff and even some policy folks in DC that were like, no, student debt is different. Student debt is good debt. But they refused to acknowledge the ways in which student debt was disproportionately burdening and holding Black and brown borrowers back disproportionately, right? And that some disproportionately Black borrowers who were taking on debt were having worse outcomes than their white counterparts who didn't even complete a college degree. And so for some folks in this country, student debt is not good debt, and that requires that kind of action, but it required evidence-based research, right, to actually change that narrative. And so I would love to hear from you. How can evidence-based research help strengthen the case for free college and debt cancellation in policy debates that we're having now and in the future?
Yeah, definitely. And that's spot on. Thank you for that, adding that piece. And so at EQRC, it's our mission to utilize research to advance and uplift the concerns of communities of color. And for us, evidence-based research provides facts to combat against feelings and narratives about student loan debt that's, being pushed today. And so, I'll even go back to a study that two of our researchers did at EQRC. It's titled Jim Crow Debt, and it uplifted Black borrowers' experience with student loan debt. And that study ended up leading to, Dr. Jalil Bishop being able to give presentations to the Biden administration and congressional testimony, and also serve as a federal negotiator on the Student Debt Relief Rulemaking Committee, which ultimately led to billions of dollars of immediate student loan debt cancellation based on hardship regulations being renegotiated. So we saw in real time that, because if you remember, student loan forgiveness was not a priority of the Biden administration at first, and then it became a priority. And in that case, we saw firsthand how we had research ready to contribute to that conversation and combat against harmful narratives. And although, we didn't get everything we wanted, we just saw kind of in real time how that can add to the conversation to kind of push policy and push forgiveness. And so, that's why at EQRC, we've dedicated what we call our justice agenda to expand on that study and uplift Latinx borrowers' experience with student debt. We're also prioritizing a data simulation that can show the economic impact of student loan debt forgiveness for free college policy. So we want to change the narratives that are currently being pushed by uplifting the voices of folks who are most harmed by the student loan debt, and show through evidence the benefits of free college to the economy. And that's how we shift the narrative from, being talked about as, this new generation, they just don't want to pay back something they borrowed, but really showing real implications that it has on people and families and the benefits that these policies could have on society as a whole.
I'm over here just like this whole time. So keep it up, girl. Keep it up. So you spoke about how having evidence-based research ready to go in the queue for when, you know, the opportunities of a lifetime happen, right? And that was something that I think this movement was so prepared for.
Right.
In addition to having policy recommendations and evidence ready to go to justify, you know, specific policies, we also had a very broad coalition of folks across a multitude of spaces, right, that really came together to justify why student debt was an issue for the civil rights community, for the labor community, for,
Right.
you know, across the board, right? And so, you know, what have you seen as effective strategies for building broad coalitions like this around free college, especially across students and labor, racial justice, and community organizations in particular?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, as you said, cross-sector collaboration and mobilization is just a tried and true tactic that dates back hundreds of years that works. And so history teaches us to stay ready, so we ain't got to get ready. And it's coalitions and organizers' jobs, right, to stand 10 toes down, regardless of,
Yep.
you know, the current temperature on these issues, whether it's in our favor or not. Like, we're better together about organizing our efforts toward a common goal and being ready to go. And that includes, you know, for us it's research, but it's also mobilization through coalitions. And so at EQRC, we take that very seriously. We actually manage two coalitions. We have a Pennsylvania Labor Union Coalition and a Free College Coalition, and the latter is more of a nationally based group with stakeholders all across the country. It's made up of, you know, civil rights organizations, labor unions, grassroots organizations, economists, policy folks. And what we found is that you have to keep up momentum. So one, having somebody to organize and say, like, we're the people who are going to make these meetings. We're going to hold intentional space for the group to convene, whether we have every single member of the coalition present or just a few folks present. We're going to continue to meet and talk about how we're reaching our common goal in our different areas that, you know, of impact. And we established the priorities of the coalition that we should achieve as a collective, right? So bringing together all these other, you know, folks from different sectors, it's like I'm coming in with, you know, all these things of labor and civil rights and folks on the ground, and I have all this expertise. But it's now that we're all moving together, what is our common goal? Like, what do we want to achieve, and how do we do that as a group? And so goal setting is just important there, and then pointing people back to the common goal, right? Because you
Yep.
get so many great fired up people together, it can kind of get lost in translation, like, oh no, we're doing this, we're doing this. So keeping people focused on the common goal. And we're proud to serve as just the anchor of it. Like, we by no means are, you know, the experts that know everything, but we like to think of ourselves as the anchor. We you know, hold the calendar invite, we make sure folks come. And then we're establishing ourselves at EQRC as the research arm, you know, for the movement towards free college. And so for us, half the battle is getting people together and agreeing on a time to meet, you know, like
Yep.
with different moving schedules. And after that, if you get that space though, and protect that space, it's figuring out how to engage folks, how to capture all the ideas that are flowing. And we've organized this space for our Free College Coalition after a few months of meeting consistently. One of the coalition members who's on here, Luke Heron, he's on the call today. He gathered some folks from his university to host the coalition for a free college conference that's happening in October. And so we're going to have different panels that just kind of continues to interrogate higher education, the state of higher education policy right now, the state of like free college policy, and brainstorm solutions. So we believe that gathering will just only further energize our coalition. So just finding ways to keep up the momentum and just make sure you have someone to anchor back to the common goals.
That is so important. It sounds so simple, right? Like creating the space and keep gathering. But in a moment like this, where so many advocates and organizers there are so many attacks happening all at once, right? Like this administration right now, they're very good at like flooding the zone, right? and
Right.
attacking higher ed from so many different angles. But, I think one of the key ways in which folks play defense against all of these attacks, but also still prioritize a space where we can continue reimagining, where we can continue building towards something in the future. It's so important because we don't have the luxury to only play defense, right? Like we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. I hate when people use that phrase, but it really is true.
It works. It fits.
It works. It works. Okay, so with that, how you had mentioned, EQC is the kind of positioning themselves as the research arm of the movement for free college. And we have seen just so much misinformation, disinformation. It just takes hold so quickly and so rampant on social media, and it's hard to combat. And so how in your view do we counter misinformation to ensure that coalition messaging stays rooted in justice and equity, while still also resonating widely and kind of still being impactful kind of on that larger picture as well?
Sure, yeah. So I think again, this has to start with evidence-based research and people on the ground that are, disseminating messaging. And that can be the foundation evidence-based research can be the foundation of truth and bold narratives around free college policy. And so the truth is, we already have evidence of the benefits of loan forgiveness, that have been talked about here. We already have evidence of free college policy at the state and local levels, right? So the misinformation being spread about the consequences of these programs is merely propaganda. Can't afford it. There are examples of the benefits of it that, we can just uplift policy for it to show people, and so through evidence-based research, through policy evaluation, we can spread evidence of these policies and as a political priority and the benefits of it to society. And it's something we have the opportunity to scale more broadly versus create something new. But I think the messaging has to come with facts and then also people on the ground with the messaging. And that is why, we kind of combine this priority of like facts with evidence-based research, and then also who are the right people to get together through a coalition that can disseminate information and combat narratives. Because that's the way we continue the movement going and present the truth against any attacks, violent attacks that are happening now.
That's right. That's right. You said, you named one of the most frequent, critiques of, student debt cancellation and free colleges. Oh, we couldn't possibly afford it.
Right.
And at the same time, you have Congress that literally passed legislation that will bankroll $4 trillion worth of tax cuts for billionaires and corporations. So not only can we afford it, it's just that policy choices that are made. And so with that, thank you so much, Chanel. This has been wonderful. And thank you for dropping some really great tidbits of your wisdom. And we're just so grateful to have you in this fight alongside all of us. So next, we will hear how research, coalition building, and messaging are helping to shift the landscape for justice. And so with that, I am ecstatic to introduce Roxanne Garza, who serves as Higher Ed Policy Director at the Education Trust. Roxanne will ground us in what a truly student-centered federal-state partnership for free college could look like, how Pell expansion fits into the picture, and also how shifting the narrative can really help us build the momentum that all of us have been kind of talking about thus far, that we really need for a just and debt-free future. So welcome, Roxanne, my friend. How are you?
Hi, it's great to see you and be here with everyone on this evening. I'm doing okay. I hope you're doing well too. It's a great Friday Eve.
Friday Eve. I will take it. I will take it. This first week, the short week, it's, kind of kicking my butt, but I'm here. I'm very excited to be, in this conversation with y'all. So with that, let's dig in, Roxanne. All right. So we've heard how coalitions are reshaping the fight. Now let's talk about, what a debt-free future for higher ed could actually look like. So your organization has been working in states and at the national level to really set the groundwork for free college. And there's certainly been some bright spots. We've seen states like New Mexico and Tennessee experimenting with free college programs. So I would love to hear from you on what we can really learn from these state programs for these models, and how can we ensure that these approaches are equitable and scalable nationwide?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. And so for folks on the call that may not be, as familiar with the work that's been done in states like Tennessee and New Mexico, these two states have really two primary programs that cover different students and different pieces of the puzzle, but in general, really go towards covering tuition and fees for a broad array of students at public institutions, and that cover kind of a wider range of credentials as well. So, for example, in New Mexico, they cover New Mexico residents at all ages that are pursuing certifications, associates, and bachelor's degrees. And then they have a separate program, the lottery scholarship, that is for recent New Mexico grads attending full time. So I think, in both of these states, there's sort of like almost like a patchwork of different programs that are attempting to cover a broad array of students for, again, a broad array of credentials. But at the end of the day, these free college programs have been, I would say, successful in both the messaging piece and the implementation, in terms of, messaging being clear in these states that tuition and fees are covered for students, with some, of course, with some differences among the programs, but generally that's the message that's going to students, right? That higher education is an option for them, and it's an affordable option for them. And so I would say that both programs really demonstrate that, like, statewide inclusive tuition coverage, when paired with effective communication, support systems, and of course the sustainable investment, can really enhance access to post-secondary education, because we've seen in both of these states that enrollment has increased, and that outcomes have also been increasing in terms of credential attainment. Um, so that's one thing I would say in general about the programs, but specifically, I think some design elements of note in these states are, for example, like New Mexico. New Mexico's program is a first dollar program, which I think is a critical component, really meaning that students get their state aid for tuition and fees first, and then any other aid or grants that they get after that can really be used to meet their full cost of attendance. So the other costs that might come, of course, with attending college, so housing, transportation, so all these other costs that may not be covered by the state free college program can be covered after the fact, because this program is first dollar. So I would say that is one key element that that we should kind of take away from and learn from when it comes to expanding or taking elements to try and implement in other states. Alternatively, Tennessee's program is last dollar, but I will also say that the Tennessee Promise program includes other support, like mentoring for students, which is a huge asset, especially for students from low-income backgrounds, students who are the first in their family to go to college, that really kind of need help navigating this complex system. Sometimes just offering the financial support, while a huge help, sometimes is not enough, right? Like, students maybe don't know how to navigate the system, how to apply for FAFSA, how to apply for admission. So I think that the mentoring and guidance piece is huge. And then I would say, at the end of the day, the other piece of this is, like, the core strength of these programs is that they're making higher education, affordable and accessible for a broad range, again, of eligible learners. Um, and so I would say that the other piece that's key, again, on the broad array of learners, is that these programs are open to, students who are enrolled full-time, part-time, recent graduates, but also adult learners. So some promise programs in other states really are maybe more focused on like recent high school graduates, students that maybe have historically been thought of as like the traditional college going student. But really, I think a key piece of this is that these programs are really designed to serve today's students and what the college going student looks like today. So I would say those are some elements that we can really kind of learn from when thinking about where we go from here, or how to like design particular programs in other states.
That is so important. Thank you so much, Roxanne, for kind of highlighting some of the really kind of key components to these programs and why they're important. And I'm just kind of thinking about that last point about how important it is to have policies that reflect the real lived experiences of people actually going to college today. And maybe that's, the challenge of having policymakers who've went to college a very, very, very long time ago, very, 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 very long time ago. And that just does not reflect the people who are matriculating our institutions of higher ed today. So thank you for that. So we talked about kind of some of those key components. I want to talk about Pell, because, as we're thinking about what a truly student-centered federal state partnership, and maybe you can actually kind of help explain to folks when people throw around federal state partnership, like, what do we mean by that? And, when we're talking about having a student-centered federal state partnership, what role does Pell play in, making that vision real?
Yeah. So I will say that there have been different legislative proposals that would, essentially design what we call a federal state partnership, right? And really that's what it is, right? The federal there the federal government currently is investing, billions of dollars in higher education. States are as well, but that funding isn't necessarily coordinated or tied together, right? To really kind of create a comprehensive picture for students to make higher education truly accessible and affordable, right? So I think ideally these investments would be working together to cover the either the full cost of college, of attending college, or again in a lot of these cases where programs are covering tuition and fees. And I think going back to one of the pieces that I was talking about in terms of first dollar or last dollar, I know maybe that gets a little bit wonky, but I think the key element there is that if some of these programs are designed as first dollar programs, where the state aid that you're being provided to cover tuition and fees, then other grant dollars like Pell could be used for other costs of attendance, right? And so we know that needs beyond, like, students have so many needs beyond tuition and fees, right? So even in states, again, like these states where they're getting their tuition and fees covered, students are still struggling to afford to stay in school or stay enrolled and complete their credential, because again, a lot of times if they have, an emergency that is going to cost, hundreds or thousands of dollars that they can't afford, that's a big barrier, right? If they can't afford housing, if they're if they're having trouble affording food, if they're having trouble affording childcare, right? Like all of these costs are sort of included in what we think of as the full cost of attending college, right? So I think going beyond just the tuition and fees piece is a really critical piece to make these policies truly equitable. And I think to your point, making some of these programs first dollar will help so that students who are come from low income backgrounds and are eligible for Pell Grants can again use that funding to really supplement their full cost of attendance and have their unmet need be met in these other ways. So I do think it's a critical piece, because like I said, as long as students' full cost of attendance is not being met, or if they're still having to take out loans to meet that other unmet need that's not, tuition and fees, there's still a huge barrier there. We still know at the end of the day, even in these states, that financial barriers are still the biggest challenge for students.
That's right. Yep.
And I would say, I think the other piece, as I talked about with the Tennessee Promise program, is incorporating support for these critical transition phases, right? So whether it is for a student graduating high school and going on to, a post-secondary pathway, or if it is helping somebody transfer from, a community college to a four-year college. Again, these critical like transitions are points at which students often, kind of fall out of the pipeline and really need support. So I think, having some of those wraparound support and guidance and like career navigation and college navigation is all really key, especially again for students who are coming from lower income backgrounds. If they're the first in their family, they don't have somebody at home to really help them kind of navigate these systems.
Yep.
I think that's another really big piece to like the student-centered approach here. And then finally, I will say like another big piece of these policies really being student-centered are, as we were saying, accounting for the wide array of circumstances of people who are, either attempting to go to post-secondary education or maybe coming back into the system because maybe they tried and then they stopped out for a variety of reasons and they're trying to come back in, right? So I think, accounting for students who are, parenting students, maybe they're caregivers, maybe they're working full time, right? And they're not able to enroll full time. I think just being, accommodating to the fact that students are experiencing a wide array of circumstances, and they may be, attending school part-time, they may be attending a community college, a four-year school. So I think being as flexible and broad in terms of the kinds of students that we are allowing to participate in these programs is also really key. And I will say just a last point here is that I would include there the fact that we should be allowing undocumented students and justice impacted learners to be to avail themselves to these benefits for higher education, right? Like these people are part of our communities. They are also seeking to better their circumstances through education. They should also be able to participate in these programs.
That is absolutely right. And thank you so much for naming that, because I feel like too often we are having these conversations through a lens of how can we narrowly scope this program so that only those who really need the assistance can get them. But in that process, their policymakers are literally just establishing barrier after barrier after barrier for students to get the support that they need. And it really just does run counter to our ultimate goal. So, I would love to ask one last question for you, Roxanne. How can we shift? We were talking about kind of narratives earlier, but also, there's so much misinformation about free college percolating around. And so how can we work to shift the public narrative so that free college and debt-free higher ed is not understood as just some kind of radical idea, but really as something that is truly essential to democracy, to opportunity, and to racial and economic equity in this country?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start by saying that I know that we've talked throughout this segment on the sort of the back and forth swings that we've all experienced through these last several years. But so I know it may not feel like it, but I really think that the student debt cancellation movement has made so much progress in such little time. I think, as Chanel mentioned, this effort really pushed the Biden administration in a pretty different way than when the administration started. So I think there's been a lot of progress. I think even already in terms of how we think about student debt cancellation, right? To your point, being this like radical idea that no one, a few years ago thought was realistic, to now it being more about not really like, is this crazy radical idea, but more about how would we design these processes, right? Like how, for who, what kinds of programs would be covered, like what would that federal state partnership look like? So I think even the discourse around this issue has changed a lot. And I will say that I think it's in huge effort to all of the people on on this panel in the audience. I think there's been tremendous efforts made in this area. um but I think it's also really important to note, I think even though there's a lot of attacks currently on higher education, a lot of rhetoric about questioning the value of higher education, I will say that polling continues to show that there is broad support for public investment in higher education in general, to support 2-year college, to support 4-year college, and then again just to kind of more broadly support the vision of making college truly affordable for students in this country. So I think that the more that we can talk about how investing in post-secondary education, in higher education, is a benefit not only to the individual and their families, but to our communities, right? And to the not only the economic opportunities that exist in our communities, but also the fact that education leads to social mobility. It leads to more civic engagement. It leads to healthier outcomes, right? Like all of these benefits that we know come along with education. I think we need to continue to be talking about that. And I really think that some of the the discontent that comes along with people feeling like, oh, higher education isn't worth it, or really questioning the value, is not about education, but is really about
Go to
debt
ESPN app.
piece, right? And so I think that is really what we need to be supporting in the space around changing that narrative, is really that we really need to be making
Is there a
college
match on that you can't find?
affordable. We
Hold on, Roxanne. Gotta make sure everybody's on mute real quick.
Okay.
Continue, my friend. Continue.
Yeah, no. And so I think that, to wrap up here, I think that there's really a lot of efforts, to divide us by education level, to kind of say that higher education is this, elite, thing that, only, the elite in this country graduate and go on to an elite selective college. People are borrowing frivolously and not paying back their debt. Like, I really think that is not what represents the overwhelming majority of people in this country, and the people that go on to community college to get a credential that is going to lead to a better paying job for the individual and for their families to really get ahead in this country. I think like these are the things that we need to be talking about, and the fact that making higher education more accessible and affordable means that those pathways look different for different people. And we're talking about all of those things being more affordable, right? And being ideally free, especially for the folks coming from low income families in this country. But really just the fact that people shouldn't be going into hundreds, thousands dollars of debt to get ahead, to get themselves ahead and their families ahead in this country. It's just not, it's just not what we should be standing for, right, as Americans. And so I think continuing to push the real narrative of where the majority of this country is and the kinds of paths that we pursue is really core to pushing on the narrative and continuing to make it a reality. So
Oof.
Yeah.
That was very powerful, Roxanne. With that, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to end the panel with that. because you're absolutely right. And so with that, can I ask my fellow panelists to all turn on their cameras and unmute? Because we're gonna have a little bit of a party with everyone on the screen. And also just a housekeeping note, if folks in the audience have a question, please feel free to add a question in the Q&A. There you are, Ashley. All right. So with my fellow panelists, oh, sorry, my lights just turned off. With my fellow panelists on the screen here. So one of the things that we wanted to do while our amazing audience members are sending in their questions in the chat is do a couple round robin questions. So round robin question number one. So in one sentence, what does a debt-free future look like to you? And how would it change the lives of the communities that you serve? So I'm going to start with Ashley because your name starts with A. Sorry, babe. You go first.
I feel like I'm being penalized for
Alphabetical order was the easiest way.
I mean, I think it looks like people who can live their lives with a type of autonomy and agency that they don't currently have. It looks like the ability to make real choices for yourself that are not dictated by your finances, by programs that don't work, by debt that you took on because you thought it would bring you opportunity, and that opportunity came saddled with all this other stuff, all this other baggage. So I think I think a debt-free future looks like freedom. It looks like people being able to buy houses, being able to start families, just really be able to make their own choices in a way that they can't right now.
I love that. Thank you, Ashley. Next, we have Chavis.
Yeah, I think just adding everything that Ashley said, I think it leads to opportunity for so many people, particularly those that I serve in the Black and Brown communities, and women in particular, who have been saddled by exorbitant amounts of debts, whose life prospects look entirely different without student loan debt than they would without it. So folks who could, as Ashley said, buy homes and everything else. All of that changes when you know that you aren't saddled by 10, 20, upwards of $100,000 or $200,000, $300,000 of debt. It's unfathomable, but it's an actuality for a lot of people that their debt prospects are something that they may go to the grave with. And so by ridding that shackle of debt for so many people, we really could change lives and communities and lead to a lot more flourishing for people.
I love that. Thank you, Chavis. Roxanne.
So +1 to everything that's been said before me. And yeah, I mean, I would say that this really looks like for me, students being able to make decisions about their education, about what they want to study, about where they want to go to school, what they imagine for their future without having like this huge financial decision and consideration being like what is actually driving the decision, and not really, what the individual really wants to pursue or really wants to do. I think, again, having that agency and that autonomy over your decision making, that again will then hopefully lead to more agency after your education to, again, do the things that really feel fulfilling to you, and that you are able to do that because you don't have this debt that you're worried about repaying potentially into retirement.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Roxanne. And last but certainly not least, Miss Chanel.
Yeah, this is a tough spot to be in for this question, but great answers, everybody. And I think to me it's twofold, because it's what does the debt-free future look like? So it's, forgiveness for those folks now, and then also policy that leads to, future students being able to make decisions where they don't have to burden the student debt. Like we can't just, forgive and then repeat the cycle. So I think it's it's, to me, it's both, and it's a prioritization of the future generation and also a prioritization of the current generation and the promises that were made to them that weren't kept.
Yes.
And so I think that's where we are, and we have to acknowledge, take all of that and make it a priority for the future. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
I love it. I love it. All right, so I'm gonna hit y'all with another round robin question, and this will be our last question for the night. We've talked about the student debt crisis. It would be remiss if we didn't talk about those who profiteer off this crisis. So my next question is, does corporate power contribute to the student debt crisis? And if so, how? And we can start with Ashley, or if there's anybody who has a burning response that they would love to answer, feel free to weigh in or go off mute.
I mean, I think absolutely. I think we clearly have a student loan industrial complex. We have a number of stakeholders and corporate actors. Even, and when I say corporate, I also mean some of them are technically nonprofits, right? Who benefit
That's right.
this $1.7 trillion system. When you create a system this massive, that is a federal government system, what you also create is people who have to run it, people who get to get those benefits. So you have your servicers, you have your colleges, both nonprofit and for profit, and even some publics, right? Like all higher education is a big business, and everyone has a stake in what that means. This is like these are, and for those, that's jobs, that's part of the economy. A lot of higher education institutions, for instance, are the main drivers in their cities and their economies. So there is a lot at stake when we talk about what student debt and what free college look like. And we have absolutely a ton of bad actors that we hope for policies and we push for policies that will get these under control. But when you have this much money at stake and you have this ability, then you're going to have people who want to take advantage of this system and want to take advantage of the borrowers in the system. And even you have the scammers who scam people trying to get them relief, right? So I think the short answer is absolutely, and that's what makes unraveling it so hard when we think about the legal cases and who had standing to challenge this. Like we had whole cases because of Mohila and Missouri, because they can stand and say they're going to lose the ability to service student loans. They're going to lose the ability by keeping people in debt. They stay in business. That's what they're saying. And that's what a lot of these folks are saying, not as explicitly as that, but essentially that's what they're saying. Like we run off other people's struggle, other people's debt. And that's what the system was built on. And so when we're taking this down, we have to recognize that's why we have so many folks fighting it, because they are benefiting from it in so many ways.
Yeah, I think debt always benefits someone, and debt finance education is no exception. I think one of the best examples is around the time of the Nebraska v. Biden case. It was estimated that over $400 billion would be relieved for those students. And we had all the folks, including those that brought the lawsuits in the state of Missouri, making those claims for that $400 billion. But at the same time, PPP loans were forgiven, and the estimate that in excess of $700 billion
Yep.
for that very elite group of individuals who could get PPP loans. And no one batted an eye at the 700 billion, the $300 billion plus of a gap between those two things was really interesting to me. But it services a capitalistic society and leads to a lot of people who have a lot of power because of money having their interests met. While a lot of students, particularly those who are Black and brown, would have really benefited from the student loan debt cancellation of that moment, their interests weren't that important. And so I think corporatization of education is definitely a problem. But as I said at the beginning, debt always benefits someone. And so figuring out who those entities are is one of the ways that we unravel this issue.
That is so spot on, Chavis. Roxanne, Chanel, any other thoughts that you want to contribute?
I think Ashley
They've
and
said that,
so well.
like,
Yeah.
Yeah, they did so well.
spot on. Yes.
Spot on, spot on. I would just remind everybody, it's not that we cannot afford it. Policy choices are made, and they're consistently made at the expense of everyday working people, disproportionately Black and brown, low-income folks who do not have access to the power that they should have, that they deserve. And so with that, I do want to just thank my fellow panelists for this incredibly insightful conversation. And I'm happy to turn it back to our planner and convener in chief, Wisdom Cole.
Thank you so much, Aisa. Just want to give a big round of applause to the phenomenal panel. All of the information that was given from where we're at, right? I constantly find myself asking this question, like, what is going on? How did we get here? And so to understand that from Ashley, to understand the legal perspective, right? There's a legal strategy to this. There's a legal way in which we got into this position, in this place, and there's a way in which we can use the legal system to our advantage. To understand how this is impacting democratic institutions, but more so being able to understand how we're able to bring together various entities, various organizers, activists, researchers, to understand how to craft a fair and free future, right? Today I'm wearing my me minus student debt t-shirt because I choose to dream, right? I choose to dream of an America where we don't have student debt. I choose to dream of a space where we can all thrive, right? You know, there is the possibility for all of us to do that. And then understanding what are the pathways, right? What is actually working right now, and what can we tweak? What can we add, drop, swap to ensure that we're able to ensure that get free college for everybody, right? And so again, thank you, Aisa, thank you, Chavis, thank you, Chanel, thank you, Roxanne, thank you, Ashley, right, for being here tonight, for giving this wisdom, giving this game, giving this understanding, and being co-conspirators in this fight for freedom. And so thank you so much for being a part of this webinar tonight. Before we wrap up for the evening, I really want to make sure that we hear directly from folks who are currently being impacted by this system, people who are entering into the system of student debt in this moment in time. And so very excited to have a very amazing young scholar, intellectual, somebody that I was able to meet on campaign trails in North Carolina, somebody I met at our national convention for NAACP in Charlotte, North Carolina, coming to me, throwing amazing ideas, really wanting to engage young people in thinking differently, organizing both on the local, state, and national level. He's one of the newest freshmen at Howard University, just down the street from my house. And so great to be in community with him, to organize with him, and to allow him to share his story. And so I would love to introduce Chase Howard to come to the stage.
Thank you, Wisdom. It's always so nice when you say things about me. It just makes me, it just gets me going. But hi everybody. Like you, Wisdom said, my name is Chase Howard. I'm a freshman political science student at the illustrious Howard University. And first, giving all honor, glory to God, just super happy to be here. Thank you to the Roosevelt Institute. Like the Young Thug meme, I had a plan, just need a platform, so I'm happy to be here. And it is just a real full circle moment for me because the first ever presidential library I went to when I was around 8 years old, I wish I had the pictures, was the Roosevelt Library in Hyde Park. And um, being back here for this moment just puts in perspective just how much has been put into my life in terms of understanding organizing and understanding my passion for people, right? And my passion for people led me throughout my high school career as I, did all the things I was supposed to do, right? I got the grades I needed to, and I did this for my resume, and I did this club because I always wanted to go to Howard, right? So I applied, I got in, and I was super happy over the summer. I got involved with a whole bunch of stuff on campus beforehand, not necessarily thinking too much about the financial situation because I did everything I had to do, right? We tell our kids in high school that if you just do this right, you do this right, you'll get into the school, you'll go to the school. It was not till maybe July that my dad came to me and he looked at me. He was like, I may not be able to send you to Howard. All those dreams that I had of being on the yard in one moment was in the balance. He told me that it may be a possibility. It's just really hard figuring out how much debt he can take on as he put my sister through Spelman College and not having the right type of communication from Howard's financial aid office because they're overwhelmed always because of the state of FAFSA and of financial aid in our country. He told me we had to figure out what our loan was going to look like, our Parent Plus loan. But in the meanwhile, I had to also enroll at North Carolina A&T University incredible school. I love the Aggies, love everything about my state. So I was excited, but I watched a dream that I was preparing for slowly dwindle away and prepare for a life that I was excited for, but it wasn't necessarily what I worked for. But 2 days before I had to move into Howard, enrolled at both schools, I had to, do deposits at both school, did housing at both schools, money down at both schools. 2 days before I was supposed to go to Howard, for to move in, I finally got the call that I needed. Um, and I was on my way, and I'm here now. But what most people don't understand is all the nights you sit in your room thinking about all that you were maybe missing. You think about all your inadequacies as a student. Maybe if I did this right, maybe if I spent more time away from, my community work and focus more on my grades. Maybe if I focus on my grades too much, maybe I just not smart enough. That's the toll of this moment. That's what we're here for. The students who have sparks in their eye, but because of financial barrier, they question if they did enough. I did all these things, but I was crying in my room, questioning if I did enough. This is about the dreams that are supposed to take fold, about the financial barriers that are supposed to be broken. It's about the futures of students understanding all the places they can go. And as I have learned more and listened to the incredible panelists talk about the policy side, I know for a fact that this is not about um, not having enough money as a country, because we can fuel corporate bailouts and we can fuel endless wars. We can fuel tax breaks to the richest of the richest in history as it looks right now, as we're approaching. We can do these things. It's about what we care about and what we push for and what we advocate for. It's about these meetings. It's about how we organize and prepare. Because, as Mr. Chavis said, it's not just about the courts. It's not just about the executive. We have an election coming up next year where we can organize people across the broad coalition, young people. I'm going to be working to get young people out there because we all deserve the future that is allotted in that American dream. So, let's make sure we take from this meeting and continue to fight for an equitable, affordable, and free system of higher education and policy that aligns through organizing next year and organizing as much as we can every opportunity to fight. So, I wanted to end off with a quote that I found from a great philosopher that I'm sure we all engage with during our schooling years. He said, "I've heard that there are troubles more than one kind. Some come from ahead and some come from behind. But I brought a big bet. You see, now my troubles are going to have troubles with me." Dr. Seuss. So let's continue to fight and prepare for a future that we all deserve. Thank you.
Chase, thank you so much for sharing that story. You are the hope for our future. Organizers like you, continuing to be resilient in the face of all the things that your generation is facing. I know myself, as well as the panelists who are here, are in this fight with you, are in this fight with the millions of borrowers who are being impacted by this, and the millions of students who deserve a better and equitable future. And so thank you so much for sharing your story and urging folks to get into this fight, right? Organizer to organizer, we know that the job's not done until the job is done. And so that we're going to continue doing this together. We are a little over on time, and so I'm going to be brief, but want to again thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to the Roosevelt Institute for hosting this webinar. This is such a critical moment in time. We have to do work to shift the narrative when it comes to student debt and free college. I want to shift your attention to next year being the 250th anniversary of America, right? This is an opportunity for us to redefine higher education as a public good and not a private burden, right? We have to ensure that we are centering racial equity for Black, brown, and low-income communities that cannot continue to carry out disproportionate debt. Millions of people are still being pushed into default. I'll say it again. Millions of people are still being pushed into default. And there are tools in place to support us engage with the resources, engage with the speakers. Definitely want to make sure we are sharing this out with folks and continuing to spread the message and spread the word. But we also have to advocate for progressive policy. We need to advocate for college for all. We need to advocate for the American college promise. We need to ensure that there is Pell Grant expansion. We have to ensure that we are restoring fairness and stopping predatory practices when it comes to bankruptcy and collection reforms. It's important that all of us engage in the system so that this is an opportunity to serve those who are most in need. You can tell your lawmakers, you can amplify your stories, you can join local and state organizations and national organizations to be a part of this fight to cancel student debt and fight for free college. Again, thank you so much for being a part of this webinar tonight. You know, the cost of freedom cannot be another generation bound by debt. It must be a promise of America that invests in its people. Have a good night.